Hey guys, it's Marshall back with you again, and we're reviewing the Legends Special Effects plugin, part of the version 1.88 Legends Quest plugin. In this tutorial video, we're going to take a look at another way we can use a special effects plugin. Again, this video is not going to be connected to quests in any way. It's something that you can use standalone. What I've done off camera, this is the same module as we had in the previous video. So what I've done off camera, I've just add some, just some environment scenery here, just to demonstrate what we're trying to accomplish with the special effects plugin in this example. So we're going to just ignore the stuff that we've already got here, just move over here to this little section, and what we've got here is basically just like a little ruins kind of thing. And this example is how we could use the special effects plugin to do like a little trap. And the trap is going to be when a player walks into these ruins, they come across a trigger. When they hit the trigger, the ceiling is going to collapse and cause some damage and leave some rubble around on the ground that the players are going to have to bash their way through to get out of. So a pretty cool little trap, and let's go through how we're going to do this. So this is a this is going to have to be a multi reaction type special effect. And as usual, the first thing we're going to need is our special effect waypoint. So we're going to go and grab that from special effects, the Mr. SE man. Now remember that it's actually quite okay to have multiple SE man waypoints here in the same area. That's not a big deal. What we do want to make sure though is the tag of each one of these is unique. We want to make sure of that. So what we're going to do is just change the tag to be something unique for this waypoint. There we go. So that's that SE man. Now we're going to configure this in a few moments. So what we really want to do is kind of discuss what we want this I guess this kind of waypoint to do. What do we want to actually see happen in this? And what I've done is I've created a little list of what we want to do, and I'm just going to grab it here. It's over on this screen. And it's basically just a little list of things that we want to have happen when the player crosses this trigger. The first thing we want to have happen is make the screen shake. Make it look like to the players, hey, there's something going on. There's a big event happening here, and it's pretty, earth-shaking, pardon the pun, but there it is. The second thing we want is to make sure that there's some sound effects playing. When our screen is shaking, we want the sound effects of some falling debris. We want a visual effect to show that there's some falling debris. We want to cause some damage to the players, of course. We want to have this ceiling collapse on top of them. That's the whole idea of the trap. We will allow like a reflex save kind of thing. We also want to make some rubble appear with some crashing visuals, so we do want to have that. And we want to be able to turn everything off when we're done. So we want to be able to deactivate everything and set it up so that the next set of players that happen to come along will also be able to trigger it. And we also want to put in a little notice to let the players know what just happened. You just triggered a trap, the ceiling just collapsed. So we just want some information to appear on the screen for the players. So these are the things that we want to have happen when we do this. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our rubble. This is really the only piece that's outside of the SE plugin. So what we're going to do for this pieces of rubble is we're going to choose 2 pieces of rubble from our placeables palette to actually use. So we're going to go, and I've got a couple in mind already. We're going to actually use, just do a search here for some rubble, and open that up, and we're actually going to use rubble number 2 from the sunken ruins. So this piece of rubble, as you can see here, we're going to use that, and we're also going to use piece 14, this pile of rubble and debris and junk and stuff. So we're going to use these 2 pieces of rubble. What we're going to do is we're going to have them appear, kind of here and here, and then kind of trap the players, and they have to bash their way through to get out again. So we're going to need to spawn these is how this works. And as I mentioned in a previous video, we do need the Legend Spawn plugin for the special effects plugin. So we've already got that and it's already installed, so we're good to go. So what we need to do is make copies of these because that's how the Spawn plugin works. So we'll copy that one and we'll also copy this one to our module. And we're going to make some changes to their properties. So we're over properties window here. We're going to want to be able to let the players bash them, so we got to make sure they're not static and that they're usable. Players going to have to be able to bash them. We do want dynamic collisions turned on. The reason for this is so that we don't allow the players to be able to walk through them when they spawn in. So the players are going to be trapped by them. So we'll want to make sure that our dynamic collisions are on, walkable is off, usable is on, and our plot and static are off, so we're good there. We'll do the same thing for the other one. Dynamic collisions on, make sure it's not static, make sure it's usable. Okay, so that's our two pieces of rubble. I'll put that back, and I'm going to put this one back over here. So next we're going to have to actually spawn these two things in, and we're going to spawn them a little differently. Grab the legend spawned waypoints, and we're going to spawn one, say, here, and the other one, say, here kind of thing. That looks good. So we're going to grab this one first, and we're going to fire up the Legend Spawn plugin. Now again, if you're not familiar with Legend Spawn plugin, you're going to want to look at the videos and download it and read the documentation for the Spawn plugin to be able to get a grasp of what I'm doing here. And for this one, we're going to do number 14. So we'll spawn this in. And normally, if I kind of just click finish here or set some times here, what'll happen is just, when a player enters the area, this piece of rubble is going to spawn. Well, that's not what we want to have happen. We don't want this to spawn until the special effects plugin tells it to. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by activating what's called the trigger spawn. So we turn trigger spawn on like so. Then we don't want any loot to drop, so we'll turn that off. Now, we do want to have a special minimum respawn minutes and maximum respawn minutes configured here. And what we're going to put in here is -2 and -2. Now, I'll tell you what these mean. Normally, what you do in a normal spawn, is you put in the minimum number of minutes and maximum number of minutes between spawn times for, a typical creature or whatever else. You can also set this to -1 and -1, telling the spawn plugin to only spawn this thing once. -2 and -2 has an additional special function. What -2 and -2 does, is it tells the spawn plugin that when this thing is destroyed or despawned, immediately respawn it again as long as the trigger is active. Okay, so I'll run through that once more. If these are both set to -2 like so, when this thing is destroyed or otherwise despawned, and the trigger is still active, if the spawn point is still activated, immediately respawn it. Okay, now why is that important? Well, I'll explain. This is important because when a player comes along and triggers this special effect, the rubble is going to appear and spawn. When it's done, when the entire effect is complete, we're going to deactivate the spawn point. The spawn point is going to be deactivated. Okay. Now the question becomes, what happens if 20 seconds later another player comes along and triggers it again? If this was not set to -2 and -2, what would happen is the rubble wouldn't actually fall a second time. We'd actually have to wait to whatever numbers we set in here. For this was 1 and 1, for example, we'd have to wait up to a minute for this to actually spawn again, which is not what we want. We want this to spawn immediately once the trigger has been reactivated. So whenever we're using a special effect like this where we're using spawns, we definitely want to set these to -2 and -2 like so. Okay. Now the only other additional thing that we want to do is we want a special spawn in effect, because this is like the ceiling collapsing. We want all kinds of special visuals and explosions and nastiness all around us when these things happen. So when this rubble spawns in, we're going to actually have a spawn in effect. And the one we're going to use for this is we're going to use fx door explosion.cef. We're going to use this. Okay, now it is wooden and stuff like that, but that's okay. Really, we're more interested in the big cloud of puffy smoke and stuff that appears when this effect occurs. So we're going to do that, and that's that one. We're going to do the exact same thing to this one, only we're going to use the other placeable, the other piece of rubble. So we're going to select this one, and again, -2, -2. Turn off the loot, turn on trigger, so that means this will not spawn until some kind of trigger activates it. And we're going to have FX door explosion for the appearance. Okay, pretty straightforward stuff, nothing spectacular there. So now we've got these two spawn points configured. Now, something that we do want to actually make sure we do is we want to record the tags of these. So when we go over here, we'll look, and the spawn plugin has created a unique tag for each of these spawn points. We're going to want to make sure we copy these and save them, because we're going to need them later. So I'm just going to do that here. I'm going to take a copy of that one. I'm going to take a copy of this one, because later on in the special effects plugin we have to tell it which spawn points we want to activate when our effect occurs. Okay, and that's that. So those two are pretty much done, ready to go. The next thing we want to set up is our trigger. Now remember from our previous video, under our triggers in Legends Quest, under special effects, we've got this special flag trigger. Crossing this trigger activates flags for the area. So I'm just going to drop this trigger down, just kind of right here, like that. So when the player walks into this little area, maybe we'll put a chest or something in here, or whatever. For whatever reason, the player walks in here, they trigger this effect. So we're going to put that back and select it like that. So we've got that done. Now, all of these visual effects and the damage that we're going to do and all that stuff is going to kind of happen out of thin air. We don't really have an individual placeable where we want to center all of these activities on. Unlike the previous one where we originally started centering our flame effect on this brazier over here, and then eventually we use the object helper. We have to do that. We have to have some kind of place that we're going to apply all of our effects to. And this is again where we're going to want to use that special placeable object, the special effects object helper. So I'm going to go in here under special effects and grab our special effects object helper. So this is kind of the center of where all the action happens. All of our special effects are going to be applied to this special effects object helper. Okay, and you'll see how we're going to do that in a moment. We're going to change the special effects object helper's tag to something useful, meaningful for this event, and we're going to call it, ceiling trap. That's going to be our tag, and we're going to use that quite a bit in this special effect. That's where we're going to apply all of our effects. Okay, so that's done. So we've got that done, and now we're ready to go. All we have to do now is determine which flag we're going to use when a player crosses this trigger, and then which effects were going to happen when that flag is active. So we're going to select this trigger, fire up the special effects plugin, select file, set flags on a trigger instance, and remember we only have 31 flags for an entire area. Flag number 1 was for the other trigger lighting the fire on the brazier, so we're not going to want to use that one again. We're going to use a different one for this. So let's use flag number 2. Now this is on a per area basis. Okay, so you can have up to 31 different flags per area. So flag number 2 for this particular trigger. Okay, when somebody crosses this trigger here, flag 1 gets active. This special effects manager will light the fire when flag 1 is set. This trigger is flag 2 when that one's set. This guy is going to be watching for flag 2 when we configure it in a moment and cause flag 2's effects to happen. And that's pretty much all we have left to do, is to just configure this. So let's look back at our list of things we want to have happen when this flag 2 occurs. First thing we want to do is make the screen shake for a couple of seconds. So let's do that. Make the screen shake for a couple of seconds. We select our special effects manager here. We fire up our special effects plugin on it, special effects, and on flag 2, which we're activating here, We want a visual effect. Okay, where we want to center this visual effect is on our ceiling trap special effects helper. We don't need a source tag because that's for beam effects only, and the visual effect that we want to have happen is going to be the VFX FNF screen shake, this one right here. Okay, we don't want to delay it, we want it to happen immediately as soon as the player crosses that trigger. So the duration for this one is going to be 0. All fire and forget, that's what FNF is for, durations should be set to 0. Okay, and that's it. Add. Objective number 1 done. So when we look at our little list here, make the screen shake for a couple of seconds, that's completed. The next one we want to have is to play some sound effects of the falling debris. So this screen shake doesn't actually cause any sound effects. You don't get to hear anything when this happens. So we want to actually add that. We want to play some sound effects when this thing happens. So what we're going to do is going to add another one. Again, the special effects plugin keeps the last checkboxes that you had on, so that in the event it kind of assumes that you're going to do multiple ones for the same set of flags, so it doesn't require you to recheck all the ones again. So it kind of does that on for you. You can just use the clear flags if you don't want to do that, but we need this to also occur on flag 2. So the same trigger. This one is going to be a sound effect. So we're going to play a sound effect when this occurs. We want to center that sound effect on our ceiling trap yet again. We don't want to delay it. We want the sound effect to happen as soon as the player crosses the trigger. And the sound we're going to use for this one is AS_NA_rock fall. We're going to use G2 for this. So we're going to get a sound effect of some falling rocks happen when this flag is activated. So we'll add that. And that will cover item number 2 from our list of what we want to have happen. The third thing we want to have happen is to perform some visual effect of falling debris. We want to see something happen. So our screen shook, we've got some sound effects happening. Now we want to see something appear on the ground. We don't want our debris yet, but we want to see some kind of crash or something appear on the ground. And what we're going to do for this one is another visual effect. Again, when flag 2 is hit, we're going to center this on our ceiling trap. And our visual effect for this one is going to be VFX spell hit earthquake. This one right here. Okay. Duration for this one is also going to be 0. It's a spell hit, so it's temporary by its nature. So this one is going to be a couple seconds long, and then it'll disappear again. Now, this is where we're going to look at putting in a little bit of a delay. Now you have to kind of play the events out in your head as you're doing this. Immediately, as soon as the player crosses a trigger, they're going to get a screen shake, they're going to get a sound effect, and then what we want is a couple of seconds after that, like 3 seconds after that, we want to see some kind of ground breakage. Okay, so that's why we're going to put a little 3-second delay in here. Okay, and again, this happens when flag 2 is active. And then when we pull over our items, we want to notice that our next thing that we want to have is to cause some damage to our players. We actually want our players to get hurt by this. So let's push that one back. And we're going to set our reaction to AoE damage. It's area of effect damage. The center of the damage, where we're going to have our radius out from, is going to be our same special effects object helper. Our delay for this one is going to be 3 seconds as well. Now, this is kind of fun because what this one does, actually I'm going to make this 3.2 seconds. What'll happen is we're going to set a radius for this AoE damage, and when the players see the screen shake for the first time, usually they're going to be like, oh, what's going on here? And then 3.2 seconds later they're going to take some damage. But anybody who's familiar with this trap are going to see the screen shake, and this will give them 3.2 seconds to get away. If they can get outside the radius of the damage, maybe they won't get hurt. So that's why we're going to do it a few seconds after. It doesn't really make sense to have the screen shake and have some sound effects and then immediately damage the players. Like, nothing has fallen yet. We're just shaking the screen. Nothing has actually hit the player yet. So we do want that delay. of 3.2 seconds to make it a little bit more realistic. The minimum amount of damage, and we're going to design this for like level 1 players, so the minimum amount of damage is going to be 4, maximum amount of damage is going to be 6. The damage type is going to be a bludgeoning, because it's sealing rocks. We're going to allow a reflex save, so the player is going to be able to have a reflex save, and we're going to say it's a DC of 14. The reflex type is going to be versus traps, so we'll select for save versus traps. We're not going to really need a visual effect. Now this visual effect for this one is a visual effect that appears on the player that got hit. So if a player gets hit and takes damage, this is an optional visual effect. Maybe some blood squirting out of the player or something like that. We're just going to leave that for now because we've got enough visual effects going on already. But that's just an optional visual effect whenever a player takes damage. If this was like an electricity trap or something like that, maybe you want to put some like electric jolts on the player or whatever, right? But that's what that's for. We're going to leave it off for this one. And we're going to set it to a 10-meter radius. So 10 meters from the center of our special effects helper is going to be the range of this AoE damage. So even if a player, a player and his buddies are walking along in a party, one guy comes over and trips over this trigger, everybody's going to get hit by this ceiling, so thanks a lot, guy, right, kind of thing. But that's what'll happen. So that's our damage to the players in the vicinity. So we'll select add for that. We'll bring over our list again. Now the next one is we want to make some rubble appear with crashing visuals. Now we've already got some of this done. This is the 2 spawn points with those 2 pieces of rubble that we've got configured that are set to trigger. But we haven't actually told the special effects plugin, hey, when this happens, I want you to activate those spawn points to make that rubble appear. So that's what we're going to do next. So the first one we're going to do is we're actually going to activate a spawn point. So remember, the spawn points are set to trigger spawn, which means they're not active until some outside force activates them. This is what we're going to do here. We're going to activate them. So remember when I said record the tags of those spawn points? Well, that's where we're going to use them. So the first one I'm going to grab, which I saved over here, we'll put in right there. We'll set this to 3 seconds. So 3 seconds after, the screen shakes and we get some sound effects, this first piece of rubble is going to be activated. Now remember, there's a difference between activating and actually spawning. When we say we're activating, that just means that the waypoint has now become active and the Legend Spawn plugin manager is going to spawn it when its time is up. Okay, so that may not necessarily be what we want, but we'll show you how we're going to get around that in a second. So we'll activate the first spawn point, then we'll activate the second spawn point, and I'm going to grab its tag over here, and he's going to be 3 seconds in as well. So we're activating both of those spawn points. Now, there's a problem here. The problem is that now that both of these spawn points are active 3 seconds after the screen shakes, the spawning manager may not spawn them immediately. The reason is because the Legends Spawn plugin manager only checks for spawning once per minute. Now if you're familiar with the Legends Spawn plugin, you'll already know this. If not, go back and take a look and you'll understand what we're talking about. The Spawn plugin only spawns active spawn points once per minute. So that may not be what we want. We don't want to activate these spawn points and then 45 seconds later these things finally appear. So we have to do something special. Once these spawn points are active 3 seconds later, we actually have to fire the spawning. So there's a special reaction called fire spawning, which means any waypoints that we've activated, immediately spawn them now based on our delay. So these things don't become active for 3 seconds, so we're going to set this delay to 3.5 seconds. So what we're going to see here as we go down through the list, screen shake immediately, sound effect immediately, some ground damage 3 seconds later, players take some damage 3.2 seconds later, 3 seconds later 2 spawn points get activated, and then 3.5 seconds later those waypoints spawn. So we're going to add that. Okay, that's that one. Now we're going to come back and look at our list. Number 5 is now finished. Now number 6, turn all of the flags off and reset everything. Now this is a very special very special reaction. Oftentimes, when you're turning flags on and you're having an event occur, that's great for the players that just triggered it or caused it. You know, our brazier just lit up for that guy who crossed that trigger. That's great, they get to see it. But this is for persistent worlds. How do we handle it for other players and other adventures that may come by 10 minutes from now? You know, the flag is set to on. How do we get that flag turned off again for the next guy to come along and trigger this trap? You know, they're going to bash their way out and, you know, get through the rubble and stuff, but then they're going to leave. How do we get other players to be able to enjoy the benefits of our special effects? What we have to do is reset the event. Okay, now there's a special reaction in here called reset all effects and flags. This is a very special one. What happens is when this occurs, everything in here is reversed. Everything is turned off. If there's a visual effect that's set to permanent, it's turned off. If there's a sound effect that's ongoing, it's turned off. If there's a spawn point that's been activated, it's deactivated. So all kinds of things like that. Another good example is our flame over in our brazier that we lit up in the previous one that we set to permanent duration. It's turned off when this occurs. And then most importantly, flag number 2 that we had turned on is turned off. Okay? So everything is reset. Now, of course, we don't want this to happen right away. We don't want this to happen when the players first trigger. We want all these things to happen first, and then a few seconds later, reset everything. So we're going to set the delay on this to 8 seconds. Okay? So 8 seconds after the player triggers, everything gets reset. Okay? Now, what's kind of cool about these spawn points is that when the spawn plugin spawns these 2 pieces of rubble, those 2 pieces of rubble will stay there forever until they're despawned or destroyed. Okay, so when all the players leave the area, they get despawned, or when the player bashes them, they'll get despawned. Things that are spawned in do not disappear when this reset occurs. What this reset does is simply deactivates these spawn points so that they don't spawn again immediately later. You know, they don't spawn a minute later. They turn off and they stay off until this is triggered again. But anything that already spawned stays there. So, you know, the players still have to deal with that. They still have to deal with the 2 pieces of rubble. So we're going to add this, and that covers resetting everything. Okay, let's grab our list, and that's done. Now, the last one we want to add in is notifying the players what just happened. You know, visually, I think they got a pretty good idea of what just happened, but let's give them some extra information. It's useful to pass off extra information, so we're just going to do that as our last little tidbit here. What we're going to do is we're going to display an alert box. Let's display an alert box, and we're going to set the center of this alert box to ceiling trap. Now, what this means is that anybody who's within a few meters of this ceiling trap is going to get an info message on their screen. And we're going to make this appear, let's say 2 seconds in, or actually 3 seconds in, just before the damage occurs. Or just a moment before the damage occurs, we're going to display this message. And we're going to just say, the ceiling collapses. Just like that. Now, as you're probably familiar with our previous videos when we were doing, little text boxes over on the side here with extra details, you can fill that in too, but we're not going to need it for this one. We just want the players just to say, hey, the ceiling collapsed. That's what's happened. So we're going to add that. Now we've got a great little list of things that are going to happen when flag number 2 is turned on. When is flag number 2 turned on? When our trigger is crossed. Okay, and that's it. We are done. We are going to fire this up now in a single player game and have our character walk across this trigger and see how it all looks. So we'll see you in game in a second. So we're back in game here, and as you can see, here's our little ruins here, and our brazier is still there. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk over here and kind of investigate and see what happens. Oh, we've got some screen shaking and noise, and boom, some effects, ceiling collapses, and oh, we've got some rubble here now. So, you know, how do we get out of this? Well, we've got a little gap right here, but we could obviously just adjust the positioning of those waypoints to kind of trap the players in there, and, you know, they would have to bash their way through to try and get out. And of course we have no weapons, so we're not going to be able to do much good in bashing, but we did make our save, so we didn't take as much damage. We only took a couple of points of damage. But what I will demonstrate actually is just make it so I can destroy these pieces of rubble. And I'm going to bash my way through them.
Soon trouble no one again.
And show you what happens when we trigger it again. So, you know, as we recall, 8 seconds have gone by, so everything should be reset. That flag number 2 now is turned off, so the whole thing is ready to go again. So we'll get rid of this piece of rubble, if we can. There we go. And we'll go right in here and try and trigger it again. And the screen shakes, and get some sound and some earth and message, and there it is again. We took lots of damage that time. I guess we failed our save versus trap that time, so we took some more damage there. And again, what you really want to try and do is, you know, if I was doing this for real, in a real persistent world, I'd probably, you know, maybe even add 3 pieces of rubble with 3 spawn points, just to really kind of close this area off, so the player has to bash their way out to be able to get out of here instead of using this little gap to get out. But you get the idea of how that works, and how, you know, multiple reactions occur on a single flag. And again, that's all for flag 2. I can still go over here, if you recall, and activate flag 1, which still causes our little fire to appear permanently on this brazier, because we crossed that trigger there. So that, you know, these are independent of each other. This one is for the whole flag 2, this one is for flag 1. So that gives you another little tidbit on how you can use the special effects plugin to cause various things. And what we're probably going to do next is do a little tutorial of how we can combine some of these special effects with a little quest. So we're going to create a little quest scenario where, you know, there's a bigger story, but we're just going to focus on one little part of that story, and how we can make a small little quest, put it together with some special effects to be able to make that little quest a little bit more interesting. And then once we finish that one, I think we'll probably do one more video, and that one's going to be more of a large scale type quest, where we're going to have multiple ways to finish it with multiple special effects and things like that. So we'll get into that as we go. So let's move on to the next set, and we'll see you back in the tool set for the next part.